So this is the Professional Judgment webinar from Colorado State University. My name is Bryce Buckley, he, him pronouns. I'm the coordinator for professional judgments here, and I'm a first generation college student from a lower income background. So financial aid was really important for me, and also a very scary and intimidating process for me to go into. So my hope for this webinar is that you will leave with a clear idea of what this process looks like, and hopefully it'll help you to understand whether or not a professional judgment appeal will be beneficial or won't be beneficial for you. So again, thank you for joining me here. So to get started, we will be talking about what a professional judgment appeal is. So you might see a professional judgment appeal abbreviated to just a PJ. So I'll refer to it as PJ for the rest of the presentation. A PJ is an opportunity to appeal some of the information that is required in order for you to submit the FAFSA. So we recognize that the information that the FAFSA requires doesn't always accurately reflect where you or your family's situation is now. The FAFSA, especially looking at tax information, is looking at information from 2 years ago. So a lot can change, especially during COVID times, which is why we are really trying to push this process and help people understand how it may or may not benefit them. So this process will allow you or your family to submit documentation that will represent your current financial or household situation. And this will be used to potentially increase a student's eligibility for federal, state, or institutional funding. So these are just some quick points of things that may or may not be considered in terms of pursuing a PJ. So things that can be considered are loss of employment, significant change to income. So this would just be like a decrease to income, whether it's for parents or student. Large medical expenses not covered by insurance. So that's not as common. However, it does happen given some family circumstances. And it also doesn't necessarily have to be specifically medical expenses. That's just the most common type. But you know, sometimes it's something like dental expenses, or I've even seen some personal expenses that people have had brought on due to other things happening in life. So there can be some pretty diverse expenses that happen. So don't think that it's specific to that. That's just, again, the most common. Separation or divorce, death of a parent or spouse, loss of child support or alimony, and natural disaster affecting the home that you live in. So again, this isn't an extensive list, but most common ones, and we'll hopefully give you an idea of things that can be considered. And things that cannot be considered would be like a reduction in 401k or investments. And the reason for that is that those types of accounts tend to fluctuate as is. So it's really hard to decide what moment in time we would be grabbing to make adjustments for that. It's just not something that we can really do. Next would be credit card debt or car payments, parents' inability or unwillingness to borrow the Parent Plus loan, or another institution offering more aid. Those are all, again, things that cannot be considered for a professional judgment appeal. There are some important things that you'll want to know going into the process. So if you are a transfer student that has gone through this process at another institution, or maybe you have a sibling at another school and you both are going through it, the process can look different at different schools. The reason for that is that the Department of Education doesn't actually require schools to provide the professional judgment appeal as an option for students. So with that said, there aren't a ton of rules and regulations around what that process would look like, which is why some schools will have things set up differently than others. So just keep that in mind, that when you're going through the process, it's going to be unique, and you'll want to try to keep that straight. And so just work with each financial aid department to make sure that you're doing what that particular school needs. When you complete a PJ at a school, only the school that completed that PJ can see that information. So if you are looking at another institution or something like that, they won't be able to see what I have done and vice versa. So just something important to keep in mind, that the outcome could also look different at different schools, just depending on how their processes work. Potential benefits to a PJ can vary, but in general, the goal is to increase aid or to make more room for need-based aid. So to expand on that a little bit, additional aid would be new aid or an increase to the aid that you've already been offered, while making additional room for need-based aid is ensuring that a student is receiving the maximum amount of need-based aid that they can. So when you're thinking about that in general, need is calculated by looking at the cost of attendance for an academic year, which you can find in RamWeb, minus your FAFSA, EFC, or expected family contribution. That difference there is a student's need. So by completing a PJ, if we are able to reduce that FAFSA expected family contribution, then that would increase the amount of need that a student has. And that could make more room for things like work study, a subsidized loan, outside scholarships, things like that. I know a lot of times people don't feel like loans are necessarily additional assistance, and I understand where you're coming from, but just to explain a little bit, a subsidized loan is considered a need-based loan because it does not start accruing interest until a student enters repayment, which is about 6 months after you graduate. So because of that, it can be a more beneficial loan in like emergency situations where somebody just needs some additional aid to help cover things, because a lot of students will try to pay that off before it even actually enters repayment. So it's just kind of like a dollar for dollar payoff there. There is also a limit to what professional judgment appeals can account for. So for the most part, we can't account for any financial hardships that aren't already reported on the FAFSA. So for example, a reduction in home value can't be something that we appeal because there's nothing on the FAFSA that we would be able to adjust based on something like that. Also, something to keep in mind is that a lot of times, the most common probably PJ scenario is a decrease in income, but sometimes people don't always see the benefit that they're expecting from that. The reason being is that you may have a reduction in income, but if there are high adjustments to your income, so your adjusted gross income is actually the same or higher than it usually is, then there's not really going to be a change because the FAFSA does take that adjusted gross income pretty heavily into consideration. Additionally, if assets are high on the FAFSA, decreased income could have some benefit, but those high assets are going to kind of offset that a little bit. So just to give you an idea of why, even though there's a decrease in income, there might not be the change that you're expecting. So I know that these things can be hard to plan for, especially if you aren't exactly familiar about the inner workings of the FAFSA. So you can reach out to our office and kind of explain your situation. We can help you to understand if a professional judgment appeal is going to be beneficial. With that said, we won't know exactly what the outcome will be until we're able to actually perform the PJ, but we can give kind of a general idea of like, yes, it could be beneficial, or no, this definitely isn't going to make a difference, or it's not going to make enough of a difference to allow for any additional aid or any changes to your aid. So what does this process look like? First thing that you'll want to do is speak with a financial aid counselor. Again, they can help you kind of figure out if this is something that you'll want to pursue. Sometimes there's other processes that will be more beneficial depending on your situation. There's also an email that OFA_professional_judgment@colostate.edu. That is monitored by me. And if you have any questions, particularly if you have like a very specific situation that you feel like is very unique, not something just like a decrease in income, but maybe more specific or has a lot of details to it, feel free to email me at that email address and just let me know more about your situation. We can always set up a phone appointment, maybe if it's easier that way, so we can kind of figure out the best direction to move forward, and we can kind of get on the same page. After that happens, you will obtain the actual appeal form, and I'll go over the form a little bit more later on. But once you have that done, you'll submit the form via the document upload page on the financial aid website. In addition to that, you'll need documentation that will support the appeal. So this page here is just giving you some general examples of the most common types of documentation that are needed. So the statement of circumstance is actually something that you'll need to submit 100% of the time with a professional judgment appeal. It's basically letting me know what you want me to look at, what your situation is that we need to potentially make some adjustments for. Tax returns, that's again very common, but with COVID, people have seen impacts some have seen impacts in 2020, some in 2021, which obviously in 2021 you wouldn't have tax returns yet. So that's why that one isn't always the case, but can typically be required. Pay stubs, this would be if specifically like if the reduction or loss of a job was in 2021, we'll use that to project 2021 income. W-2s, again, this would be from a completed year. Unemployment benefits, severance, if a job was lost, divorce decree, things like that. Again, there could be other documents needed, but these are just to give you an idea of the most typical types of documentation that are needed. So once you have submitted the PJ form and the supporting documentation, I'll review your completed appeal. When I'm doing that, I have to look at a 12-month period of time. So 99% of the time, that's going to be a calendar year, like 2020 or 2021. There can be some flexibility to that, but it can't be super obscure. So by some flexibility to that, I mean something like what might be considered a fiscal year, like June of one year to July of the next, something like that. If there's any clarification or additional documentation that is needed for me to fully understand the situation or to process the appeal, I'll reach out via email to communicate that. So just make sure to keep an eye out for any communication that might be relevant to your professional judgment appeal. I'll put that in the subject line, so hopefully it's pretty clear that it's regarding your professional judgment appeal in that circumstance. Then if all the proper documentation and everything has been submitted and reviewed, I will actually take the information from the appeal and make updates to the FAFSA based on that information. Once I make those updates, I will recalculate that FAFSA EFC, or expected family contribution, which will again help us to see if there's increased eligibility for need-based aid and increased aid or increased eligibility for aid in general. This is some screenshots of our actual professional judgment appeal form. I know that it's kind of small in terms of text, but I just kind of want to give you an idea of what you would be expecting in terms of what you would see, and to kind of explain what each section is. So step one there is just letting me know what type of appeal you're pursuing. So if it's a loss of a job, you can see there that there's some supplemental questions that you might need to answer as well. With that said, if you have multiple things going on, like it's not uncommon for me to see something like loss or reduction of income and an unusual expense. You can check more than one on here. It's just that when you're going through the process, one, on that statement of circumstance, you'll need to address all situations that you mark on this page. And with documentation, you'll need to provide supporting documentation for, again, everything that you're reporting on this page. So sometimes that's not super clear. And again, you can just reach out and let us know and we can walk you through what is actually needed. Or some people go the route of just submitting what they think is needed and waiting to hear from me about whether that's good enough or not. Step 2, this is for dependent students only. Independent students won't see this section because parent information isn't required on their FAFSA. But this is providing us actual income information. So the first column there is 2020 information, which at this point should be pretty straightforward because that year has concluded. So this information that we're asking for is basically exactly the same as what is reported on the FAFSA. So hopefully your parents can just go through their tax return and fill this out based on their 2020 tax return. The 2021 column is a little bit more obscure because we're projecting. So that's where you your parent would be looking at their year-to-date income if they lost their job in 2021, or a reduction of income. They might need to look at their pay stubs and kind of average their pay to see what they think it's going to look like through the end of the year. And then those adjustments to income below that first line, I know that can be hard to know ahead of time, but a lot of times something like in that second line there that says interest and dividend income, a lot of times if somebody has that, it's something that they see every year, maybe every other year. So hopefully you would have a pretty good idea of what that is looking like. If not, just do your best based on the information that you have available to you. That's how this whole section will work. Step 3 is exactly the same for the most part as step 2, but with student data instead of parent. Why I say for the most part is just because there's a section out here towards the bottom that's different than the parent side, but the concept of this section is exactly the same. If you are an independent student, though, this section is going to also ask for spousal information if that's applicable to you. Step 4, this is where you would report any of those exuberant expenses that you may have. Make sure that you are providing that type and description of the expense, but along with the amount, make sure that you're letting me know what year that applies to. So when I'm trying to determine whether we're looking at 2020 or 2021, this will help me kind of figure that out as far as which year is going to be most beneficial. Now, with that said, if this step is not applicable to you, if you don't have this going on, you can just put NA or leave it blank and move on. It's not required. Step 5 is just informational. It's really to let you know kind of a little bit more about the process, things that you might need to submit, again, things like that. Step 6 is what I was talking about before. It's just explaining that statement of circumstance. So again, you just need to provide a statement that explains what you want me to look at, what you're appealing. There's no length requirement for this statement. I've had some as short as a couple sentences and some as long as a few pages. It's really up to you about how much information you think is needed to convey your situation. Sometimes people will provide some information and I might follow up to say, to get some clarification and might ask for some edits to that statement if needed. But for the most part, it's really just what you feel like is best to explain your situation. Finally, step 7 is pretty straightforward. It's just signatures and dates, but it's basically letting us know that all the information that has been provided is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge. So that part is really important because it lets us know that you're not just doing a guessing game. It lets us know that you're actually trying to provide the best information that you can for us to move forward with this appeal process. So after the whole process is completed, you will receive a message in RamWeb. So that message, along with that, you'll get an email saying that you have a new message in RamWeb. So then you'll go in there, and that message will let you know that your appeal was either approved and there's been adjustments to your aid based on that approval, or your appeal was denied. If it was approved and there was adjustments to aid, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are receiving more aid. It just means that there were changes to your aid. So it could be something like you go from having no subsidized loan, that need-based loan that I was talking about before, to having full subsidized loan eligibility. With that said, your loan eligibility would still be the same amount total. It's just now you have some subsidized loan eligibility on top of that unsubsidized loan. So just keep that in mind when you're looking. You might not actually see any additional scholarships and grants. It's really going to depend on somebody's situation and, again, what their eligibility looks like. With a denial, it doesn't necessarily mean that you did anything wrong or that we are completely just disregarding your PJ. 99% of the time, what that means is that based on the information that I have, there's not going to be any change or a significant enough change to your eligibility to allow for any additional or changes to your aid. So I'm never going to move forward with a PJ if it's going to have a negative impact. So in that case, again, I would just deny the PJ instead of moving forward with the process. So there's no negative impact to your eligibility. With that said, the message that will come through will just say that the appeal was denied. So if you want more specific information, please reach out to me and I can walk you through specifically why it was denied. But again, the vast majority of the time, it's just because it's not going to be beneficial for you. Any adjustments to aid, again, you can see in RamWeb, but I want to make sure that it's very clear that you can always submit a second or third, whatever, professional judgment appeal. This is because, especially when we're like projecting 2021 income, maybe there is something else that changes along the way. So maybe we were projecting 2021 income and one parent lost a job, but the other parent was still working. But then partway through the year, the other parent loses their job and now neither have a job. Let's say that maybe there's something additional that happened. So there was a loss of a job, but now there's also these medical expenses that are happening, something like that. So if you aren't sure if you should pursue a second one, again, reach out, but definitely don't feel like it's a one-time deal. Things change, and that's kind of what the process is meant to address. Another thing is that the appeal does not carry over from year to year. So each year that a situation or different situations are applicable, you'll need to complete a PJ each year. It's something that we have to re-review each year. That is one thing that the Department of Education does make very clear for us. The process of professional judgment appeal could change down the road, but as of right now, this is what the process looks like based on our policies as an institution and the limited federal policies that are in place. But if there are changes, I'll make sure to communicate those, and we will always be here to answer any questions if there's any confusion. The only change I'm working on now is trying to make the process fully electronic, so it's not as cumbersome for students to have this PDF that's being thrown out. For some people that works really well, but I know a lot of times, especially if you are living far from a home, something electronic is a lot easier. So with that, I will open it up for any questions. If there are any questions, please pop them in the chat and I will be sure to address those. One thing, I'm just going to move on to this slide so you have it. This is contact information for our office and for, again, that professional judgment email address. So make sure to note that down. But again, we are open for any questions. If you have any, just throw them in the chat. Yeah, so the question is, did I hear you correctly that your PJ will be approved if it increases your aid and will just be declined otherwise? Does aid ever get decreased? So I will always decline a PJ if it's going to impact you negatively. I am not going to decrease your aid. I don't want to do that. That's the opposite of the point of this. So very good question. And I appreciate that you asked that, just to clarify. If there is any sort of change to your aid, a positive change, I will approve it. So sometimes that is simply going from just being eligible for an unsubsidized loan to being eligible for a subsidized and unsubsidized loan. And people aren't always happy with that, but a subsidized loan is a need-based loan. So to explain the difference, just in case you aren't familiar, a subsidized loan does not accrue any interest until it enters repayment. where an unsubsidized loan is accruing interest for its lifetime. So a lot of times in situations, a subsidized loan can at least provide some ease in the time being. And then students that might have the means will pay off that loan before it actually enters repayment. So it's just a dollar for dollar payoff. There hasn't been any interest on it. But I can always walk you through that if there is any confusion or concerns. But again, yeah, I will not ever decrease aid. I will just decline the PJ and leave your aid as is. Any other questions? No problem. Thank you all for attending. Oh, leaving a full-time job to move out of state to school qualify if you don't have a full-time job when you move here? Yes. So there used to be kind of this caveat with PJs, but it's not there anymore. So if you're making a change due to your education, we can still look at that. So if you didn't lose your job, but you left it, that is okay. We can still look at that situation. And if you are actively seeking employment, we might want to wait until you find employment just so we can figure out what your new pay is going to look like. Now, with that said, sometimes people are like, I have no idea. So we can pursue a PJ with the information that we have, but it's just important to let me know if there are any changes. And we can figure out the best way to move forward from there. Like I said before, I have to look at a 12-month period of time, and typically that's a calendar year, but we can adjust that to say like June of 2020 to July of 2021 or something like that, if that's going to be most beneficial. We can't look at like obscure timelines like March to April or something like that. I know that seems weird, but it needs to be a little bit more consistent. But yeah, if there is a situation like that, we can kind of figure out what would be best for you, but that can be accounted for sure. Right now, so how long is it taking to process PJs? Right now, I'm actually really caught up with them. So as soon as they come in, I'm starting to review them. So with that said, I know this is not a good answer, but it kind of depends. If when you submit everything, I have everything that we need, it'll take a couple of days for that to be processed. Unless it's a weekend, then add a couple of days more. But if I have to reach out for clarification or additional documentation, it's honestly going to depend on how long it takes for you to get back to me. But typically, once you get back to me with the information I need, I will review it right then, because usually I have the process mostly done. There's just like one or two things that I need to kind of piece everything together. So it doesn't take long for me to plug in that new information and then wrap up the process from there. So one thing I want to let you know with that is, again, once the PJ is completed, you will get a notification in RamWeb. So just in case you aren't familiar, you'll get an email letting you know that you have a new message in RamWeb. And again, that message about your PJ is going to either let you know that it was approved and there were adjustments to your aid, or that it was denied. If it was denied, I'm trying to figure this out, but right now I don't have a way to like specifically tell you why. So if you want to know why, just reach out to me and I can clarify for you. You know, maybe it just wasn't going to be beneficial for you, or you know, something else. But 99% of the time, the only reason I deny one is because PJ is not going to be beneficial. And again, I don't want to negatively impact your eligibility in any way. Anything else? No problem. Happy to help. Okay, so you have the contact information on the side here. It's also on our the financial aid website, there is a professional judgment page within the financial aid website. So you can go there for information, but also contact information, whatever, if you need to. But if any additional questions come up, any clarification is needed, I know sometimes there's questions that people want to ask individually, feel free to reach out, let me know, and we can work through that, okay? Thank you all so much for attending. I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope that you all have a good day.